Success of the Afghan presidential election will mark how the U.S. opens its next chapter in Afghanistan, which Barack Obama has made a top priority. But with a low voter turnout forecast, it's not looking good for America. For more on that, let's join RT's Aliona Minkowski in our Washington studio. Aliona, hello to you. So it's all yours.
Thank you. Well, as we continue to discuss the election in Afghanistan, from which it might take weeks before we get any results, the questions that people are really asking here in America is how much all of the violence from the Taliban, despite the troop presence, really might have affected the voter turnout. Also, how much corruption might have affected the election, and whether a new government or a Karzai's continuing government will be able to gain any credibility from the people. Here to discuss this with me is Lawrence Korb from the Center of American Progress. Thank you for joining us today.
Nice to be with you again.
Well, so my first question, I want to start with the violence. Is it more or less than was expected, and how do you think it really affected the voter turnout?
Well, it's about what is expected, and I think the important thing is it shows the Taliban are concerned that the people really don't support them, so they're trying to intimidate them. And I think it probably cut it from maybe 70% down to 50%. So it did have an impact, particularly in the areas the Taliban controlled, in the south and the east and the Pashtun areas, which are Karzai supporters.
Absolutely, but do you think that there might be that people might be underestimating the popularity of the Taliban also in Afghanistan?
I don't think so. The Taliban are not popular in Afghanistan, but if no one else will provide security and justice, they're going to turn to the Taliban as they did in the 90s, and that's the key thing. Can the government, aided by the NATO force, provide that security and justice, for them? They're going to provide the security. The government is going to have to provide the justice.
Absolutely. And do you think, let's say that Karzai doesn't get the election after a runoff, is what their people are saying, because of the lower turnout in the south of people, then can we expect a backlash from the people if a candidate from the north, let's say Dr. Abdullah, ends up winning the election?
I don't think so. I think because Dr. Abdullah is not only his father's from the north, but his mother's from the south. So if you're looking from an electoral thing, that might be a perfect candidate. But I think Karzai is at least going to have a runoff. If he doesn't get more than 50%, he's going to be one of the final two candidates. There's no way that that's not going to happen. And that would be good, because then the people in Afghanistan can focus on just two candidates. Right now, you've got something like 40 candidates running.
Absolutely. And how much of a factor does corruption play in this election? There's already been talk of stuffed voting ballots and the supposedly indelible ink that actually washed off right away.
Well, I think there's going to be some corruption. It's not going to be that much. But the key thing is that regardless of the outcome, there's going to be complaints. Because if Karzai wins big, then they'll say, well, he stuffed the ballot boxes. If he wins by just a little bit, then people can point out isolated, instances of corruption. I have no doubt there's going to be protests after this is over. And the real problem is Afghanistan doesn't have a viable judiciary to decide these things.
Absolutely. And do you think people might also take into account the way that things are run there in Afghanistan? A lot of these ballots are being transported by donkey. And also, how much of a factor does the fact play that not everybody is literate? How do the people vote if they can't read who they're voting for?
Well, only 20% of the people are literate, but that was the same in the 2004 election. You had almost an 80% turnout. I think that's the great paradox. Even though you have the illiteracy and the fear, you still get people to turn out because they recognize that what they do is going to have an impact on their lives.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us today, and we will continue to discuss these elections the next hour with you. But back to Moscow for now. Thanks, Yulia.
All right. Thank you, Aliona, very much indeed. And we're looking forward to seeing